Okay, so Michael, thank you so much. It's so lovely meeting you again, and welcome to the first episode of the Handshake. I'm honored to have somebody of your eminence agree to launch this podcast, which is aimed both at the business world and the educational world, which I believe are inextricably linked. You've been a great friend to Irish education over the years, particularly through your work with the IPPN. And I would just like you to reintroduce yourself now to the broader business and educational world, because I'm sure there are several teachers and workers out there who may not have heard of you and your work. So if you could introduce yourself and your career trajectory to date, it'd be great.
Okay, thank you very much, Teresa. It's great to be back with you. And there has been a gap here. I was strongly, as you know, connected with the Irish primary school principals and with Johnny Coulahan and others. And I did, 30 workshops a year for several years. In the
I've attended some of them.
decade is 2010 to 2015, maybe. Anyway, I was very close to the group and enjoyed and developed a lot of good connections. And I guess I will say, because I haven't had any contact for 5 years now, it seems to me that Irish education, I'm going to put it this way, from my point of view, has gone silent.
It has become so busy and so overrun with change, I think. Yes.
Maybe, yeah. So what I've done, I was Dean of Education at the University of Toronto with the Faculty of Education for quite a few years. And we got partnerships with school districts. That's where we learned on the ground. And now I have had, in my own group, it's a group of about 10 people. I won't name them all, but they are all practitioners. There's a child psychiatrist, a neuroscientist, a head of the Literacy Numeracy Secretariat in Ontario has joined me, and on it goes. There's a whole group, and we only work and write about things we're doing. So right now we're doing a lot of work in California, helping to implement the new things. And I guess I'll say the symbol of this, just so I give a conceptual focus to it, is probably captured best in my book. It's called The Principle 2.0, which was a second edition. It came out in 2023. The Principle 2.0 basically says the center of gravity for change is the combination of students, teachers, principals, and parents/community. That's the center of gravity. And so what we've been doing is build that pocket. I call it build the base, strengthen the middle, which is the region, and intrigue the policymakers. Don't depend on the policymakers, but if they know good work, intrigue them. But basically, that center of gravity is the interaction among the four groups I just mentioned, the four sets of roles. And
hence the handshake between all of these four sectors is so important, and particularly I believe with the organizational world, with the business world.
Yeah, so it includes the business world because of the parents and community, and so we've got a number of things going on, actual situations. The big one in Ottawa, Canada, with a group district that has 87 schools with 45,000 students. Another big one in Anaheim, California, high poverty, big transformation. Teachers and students as co-pilots, I'm going to say. That's how we think of it. Co-pilots of learning, co-pilots of trust, and co-pilots of coming up with the solutions now that I'd be glad to talk about that we're implementing.
Excellent. I believe you've just published your 6th edition of the New Meaning of Educational Change. Would you like to talk to me about that a little?
Sure. The first one was 1982, and it covered the decade prior to that. It was just when I was beginning. And then there have been every 8 years, there's been number 2, 3, 4, 5, and I just did 6. It will come out in 2025 in February. And I did it differently because what I did was review the first 5 editions and say, one thing we know for sure, you can't get change from the top. And here's all the evidence for 50 years, 40 years. And that therefore we need a different approach. And what I captured in that was a big critique of the old approach and a good introduction of the new approach, which is the center of gravity at the school level, interaction there, and then linkages sideways, laterally with other schools, and upwards with the region, the higher education and so
That
forth.
whole notion of collaboration and working together. Yeah.
Yeah, we call it connected autonomy.
Right.
That's our phrase now. Connected
Excellent.
autonomy. You can appreciate the nuance there, I hope. It's
Sure.
not just collaboration. It's
Mm.
individuals seeing themselves in a relationship so that they have the autonomy, but they don't have isolation. They have connection.
So they're working from their own agency, really,
Yes.
and working. Yeah, I
Yep.
get it. I get it. So really, I'm sure the difference between edition 1 and edition 6 is stark. What can we expect in the future, or is it even possible to predict?
It's impossible to predict, and that's how I framed this one. But I've also outlined the solution. I guess I'll say I called the decades. I'll just take this century. The first decade I called promising. That was we were
Okay.
doing great things in Ontario. We thought had the solution.
Sure.
The second decade, which is really 2012 onward, but anyway, around there. That decade I called while we were asleep.
We got too comfortable, and that was the
We were
age.
paying attention, and lots of things were happening, including AI.
Yeah.
So while we were asleep, and now the third decade we're working on, it's really the wonder decade, and I mean it in both senses of the words. I wonder if it'll really go down the tube, or I wonder if it will recover and be successful for humanity. And that's how I do it.
And the power is with the educators and the children and community, isn't it? As to whether we succeed or go down the tube. But awareness is fiercely important. And I don't know, there seems to have been a shift in terms of being awake to what's going on. And
well, that's why I called it the sleepy decade while we were asleep. We weren't paying attention, and lots of things were happening. So to your question about the future, I think it's a toss-up. We're either going to disintegrate or we're going to come together on a new basis. And in my book and in the other work we're doing with Anaheim and Ottawa, we're showing what the new basis looks like.
Sure. And I argue here in Ireland, and which is a mainly public system, rather like your own in Canada, I argue that a private-public divide is going to happen, and that you will pay for what you get in the private system, and the haves and have-nots will re-emerge. While we were doing great with equality for all, I don't know if we're going to be able to sustain that. What do you think in relation to that thought?
Well, I think that the world is in such a crisis, and this sounds like a kind of a dream, but I mean it seriously. We are finding that young people, as young as 4 or 5 years of age, but let's say from age 5 to 18, that they want change. They want changes in society, in the world. And that's why I use the word co-pilot to refer to them. In our new Pedagogies for deep learning, we are now at the stage where it's not voice and it's not agency. It's being a partner with educators to transform the system, because the government doesn't know how to do that.
So there's a disconnect. There's a major disconnect in governance right across the world, I believe.
I think so, but I also find that my subtle nuanced statement, remember, develop the bottom, strengthen the middle, intrigue the top. I think the intrigue the top, which is you're doing things, and government leaders, some of them at least, in some of the countries we're working in, start to pay attention and say, actually, we know it's wrong. And I hear what you're saying about how to make it right is to mobilize the bottom and the middle. That's the only way to make it right.
And I remember my own study, Increased Demands and Diminishing Resources, and how it impacts principals of schools in terms of reported stress levels, etc. I did that study with Leicester University, and really, I liken it to feeding the bear. We still do our fundraising. We still go out there. Educators go out there and they're holding the show together. So governments are guilty of not funding education properly. What would you say to that?
I think that's true, but I don't think it's money per se is not going to do things. It's what you do with the money. And I will
Yeah.
send you after we finish this. I did a paper a few months ago, an op-ed paper in the Education Journal for the US. It's called 8 Factors for Revolutionizing Education.
Very good.
And it's what we know. And it takes 4 minutes to read because that's what Ed Week says. It just
I
takes
look
4
forward
minutes.
to reading it. Yes.
It's the interaction of fact. You wait to see it. I'll be interested in what you think of it once I send it to you. It's
Excellent.
the interaction effect among those 8 factors
Uh-huh.
that makes the impact. And one of the factors, and it's a practical one, is time to work together. It's not like a bunch of money, but it is time, and time is money. We know that. But it's also the interaction of students and teachers working together, and school principals being the lead person to cause the change at the local level by interacting laterally and hierarchically.
And as an organizational psychologist, I always say pace. Pace is everything.
Yeah.
And responding in a paced way and having the confidence to hold that space.
Yeah.
What does the concept of the handshake symbolize for you in the context of education and preparing future generations, especially in today's ever-changing and increasingly digital and remote world? So I think the handshake is a very apt title for my podcast series. And what does it symbolize for you?
Well, I wanted to start, you do this well, with the concept of trust.
Mm-hmm.
That trust is at an all-time low, almost every country.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's going to increase trust, and what we are doing in our work, our development work, and think of it this way, the strategy is trust and interact.
Sure. Right.
Not just trust, but trust and interact.
Mm-hmm.
And when people interact, then either trust goes down or goes up. But if you interact, and this is the breaking through what the differences are, we see quite a bit of it in our own work, people respond to it positively, is that when they interact, and we have a few guidelines for interacting, they're in the paper I referred to, you have to be sure that you don't start laying on the judgmentalism.
Sure.
You interact, but you don't judge. And you eventually then you look for the results, and people start to change. And
so it's that psychological contract which really starts at the time of interview, they say,
Yeah.
but the psychological contract is glued together with trust.
Yeah.
And if trust is absent, that contract becomes ruptured and is very, very hard to repair, I believe.
Yeah, and trust is it's hard to get, it's easy to lose.
Sure. Yeah.
And
That's
so trust
so
is basically a trust making phenomenon. When you look at our 8 factors, they get success and they increase trust.
And you said that trust has diminished across many nations. To what do you contribute that lack of trust? Would it be a pre-COVID, post-COVID type of phenomenon, really?
I think trust diminishes when you reduce interaction.
Sure.
That's when it diminishes. And so if you take 2020 January, just before COVID hit strongly, what we had was reducing trust at a slow pace because the system wasn't set up to do that. And then COVID blew the lid off it. And so then it got exposed. So we were not interacting very well before COVID. And then during COVID, it just went out the window. So this lack of interaction has deteriorated. If I use figures, I'll say if you ask people in a given country, to what extent do you trust other people in your country? It was about 65%, 20 years ago. It's about 25% now. That's a big reduction.
And is that mainly due to governance and the manner in which we've been governed? Or is it due to that hybrid workspace, that new working from home or that digital nomad type model where there's a separation happening?
It's mainly due to people don't find value in being together. That's why you've got to change the value of the interaction. And trust is to change the interaction by reducing judgmentalism, but increasing interaction and making things work and having it develop. So I think it's
if you think back on the COVID time, stay apart to keep safe. And we've a phrase here in Gaelic, which is Níneart go cur le chéile. United we stand, divided we fall. Or there is no strength until we unite. And to my mind, stay apart to keep safe was the direct antithesis of that. And I think it was a huge contributing factor.
I think so, but the interaction was not very impressive before COVID.
Yeah.
It was deteriorating in a smaller way before COVID from the 2010, 2012. It started to decline. There was no COVID. Declined for 10 years, and then COVID just bounced it
and
out of the park.
Did that come as a byproduct of material affluence and feeling that we had it all?
I don't think so, because only the evidence on inequality increased. We have from economists now, enormous amount of increase in the distance between the haves and the have-nots that occurred between 2008 and 2020. It's still going. So this was inequality that really kind of took its toll. I did a report called I did two reports. It's the second one because they have similar names. What's worth fighting for, or what are the key drivers was the core title. Key drivers for change, and most of the drivers were negative, and I paired them with what the positive would look like. And one, it's the individualism versus social interaction. That's a driver is social interaction. It's got to have purpose, but and we're working on it now. We're getting some results.
And I wonder how that would fare out if you were to do a study West versus East in terms of our cultures and how the individual or collective, depending on the culture we live in, how they would fare out. That would be a good study to do.
It would be a good study. I think a lot of populations around the world, because I'm going here I'm now thinking about my neuroscience, just friends, Jane Clinton, who's the key member of our team, and their position about evolution is there's a natural tendency to social bond, and it gets ripped apart or doesn't because we don't pay attention to it. So I think almost all people, unless they've been developed to the point of hatred, are capable of getting closer to each other to solve social problems. And we see it. We see snippets of it, and we see what happens when we do that on a bigger scale.
And these days with the world is on the move with migration and etc. But you can't help but think these people are being displaced.
Yeah.
And they're being thrown from their own cultures and their own homes and what they're used to into other nations where they may feel wanted or not wanted. But it's really seriously impacting classrooms. And the diversity within classrooms brings its challenges along with its strengths. And is sometimes one outweighs the other. What do you think of that as a notion?
I think that's what's happening certainly in the short run, the last 7 years or whatever time frame you want to take, and it destroys the social fabric of the system.
Sure.
The question is whether there's a lot of examples of one could say that immigrants have a lot of potential to grow and develop under the right circumstances. We can learn from them; they can learn from us. So ultimately, I take a diversity of humanity viewpoint on this, and I work on trust and success on that basis.
I know. So in a world where AI can perform many tasks that humans once did, what unique human qualities do you think will become more important and more pronounced, and how must educators and the education system per se seek to prepare our young for a future in life and in the workspace that's hard to envisage at this vantage point?
Well, I think that again, it goes back to the social level. The drivers, one of the paired drivers I had was machine intelligence versus social intelligence.
Sure.
So that's what we analyzed. And you can see where machine intelligence goes off the rail a lot. But now with AI, and this is the why we were sleeping question, we are seeing, and in our own work, you'll see that AI is one of the 8 factors that in my paper that I described. And we are using AI, districts are using AI to free up time for teachers and students to interact. We're using the machine to give us time.
So the machine as the tool as opposed to the master.
Yes, yes, very much. You'll see it's very clear that we call it proximity with practice. So
Right.
we have now technology, proximity with practice, but the practice is developing the social fabric of society. That's the practice. And we have now teachers and students who can use, they can exploit technology instead of the other way around.
And what would you say to the notion, now it's a provocative question really, to the notion that really in this great reset, that there is a stripping down happening even in terms of educational standards, and that it would not be beyond the realm of possibility that we're looking at microchipping of the human in the near future?
I think it is possible that you can imagine kids of the future having chips in in part of their body, right? There's built-in
And
technology.
what are the dangers of that?
It's likely that could happen.
And we're really into the realm of the ethics of AI usage, etc. Then, aren't we?
Very much so. Yeah. One of my colleagues, his name is Prensky, his last name.
Mm-hmm.
He just did a book on AI, just reviewed it, did the forward actually. And he says he's building his solution around three things: imagination,
Mm-hmm.
knowledge, and real world accomplishment. That's the learning agenda, those three things. And he sees technology in the service of those three things.
Now, it just strikes me the over dependence on screens at a young age.
Yeah.
Surely impacts the formation of the brain and the neuronal connections and how children learn in the future, what they feel they must retain or not retain, etc. There's a certain disempowerment with it, while it seems sophisticated, etc., that a youngster is so adept at using the screen and using technology. There's a loss from the agency of the child and the autonomy of the child. And if you bring in the social media realm, it's augmenting that whole social anxiety, etc.
Well, yes, and that's most of us are reducing the early exposure to screens. I have a grandchild who's going to be 1 year age next month, and we interact with him a lot, and we protect him from seeing too much screen stuff. And he's developing the way he should. The child development now. It's incredibly it's incredible how smart children are at 6 months of age, for example.
Well,
Things like that.
they're like sponges. What was it?
Yeah.
Give me the boy to the age of 7, and I'll show you the man. But that those first 7 years, in many ways, are being hijacked and beyond the control of parents. And you've got peer influence, etc., happening at an earlier age.
Yeah.
But I worry about the effect of technology on the brain information in terms of concentration levels, retention, etc. And it's just, you wonder how it will culminate ultimately. So, can you share a personal experience or moment that reinforced your belief in the importance of evolving our approach to education?
Well, it's really what we're doing now in relation to what is happening all over the place. We're trying to blunt the negative impact and leverage the positive impact. So take one, for example, the role of music in developing young, in the womb, let alone, beyond that. So this is a whole different experience, the sensitivity and development of humans. And I think there's a humanistic strand in here that a lot of us have identified, and it favors the 0 to 5-year-old, for example. And that's where we're putting a lot of our energy in that and building on this. So we can take you to schools now that are exemplifying what I just described.
And do you think you're strong enough to make an impact that will actually turn the heads of those in government?
Yes, by ignoring them as much as possible, by building up the bottom and the middle, because Our empowerment now for the bottom and the middle, these are students and teachers together with some good leadership from school principals who are developing with us and positive examples where they say this is different than what the government wants and it's positively effective and our communities are liking it and we're building forward. And so there's a movement now of
And
this kind, what I just described.
it demands courage, on behalf of the principal, doesn't it? The
It
leader.
does, yeah, yeah.
And it
Yeah,
demands single-mindedness and the ability to stand up and say, no, I don't agree with what's happening now, and I believe this is the way to go.
yeah, in
And
some ways, the Irish are ahead because they have always had semi-autonomous principles. But what we say now, and I said it increasingly explicitly like this, the main role of the principal is to build the local system.
sure.
The local system is the relationship between teachers, students, parents, and the principal, parents, community, and the principal. That's been always the history of Irish education in some way.
I actually must send you the updates on the layoffs document, the school self-evaluation,
Yeah.
the ESDs, the UN 17 ESDs, and the proposed model for implementing that, etc. We have a load of frameworks that I can send to you
I
that,
love to see it.
yeah,
And I'm
that
going to
really
predict
show.
that they're almost always all in the wrong direction. That's what I would predict because
I
they
want to
try to
get
fix it from the
feedback on it.
top. They
Yeah.
try to fix it from the top and you can't do it from the top.
Right. So how do you capture the interest of the teachers on the ground, who many are disengaged at this stage because of overwhelm, the overwhelm of paperwork, the detraction from time to actually teach and do what they're trained to do, and the other social problems, etc., that are coming into the classroom, that it's hijacking so much time. How do
Well,
you?
we are doing this as I described, the principal's role as the co-leader of redefining the local system, but
Sure.
it's different than it used to be. It used to be individualistic autonomy. Now it's subgroup autonomy,
Right.
subgroups interacting and developing the solutions and being a political force as well as a professional force for the changes that are needed.
Are you finding that it's rejuvenating
Yeah, absolutely.
staff? Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's out in the open that yeah, this stuff I'll send you and eventually you'll see in the book, there's a whole chapter on the solution and it gives
Right.
examples. And this is students and teachers with strong leadership at the school level in favor of the school and community, not in favor of the top.
So you're working out on the ground as opposed to getting the principals and the teachers into the universities.
Yeah, I guess what you would say it that way. I don't know about
Mhm.
yeah, we're working with the schools, the principals and teachers as they develop once they're hired. I
Sure.
mean, we could
Sure.
double back, but I'm talking about those that are actually being developed on the job.
So, what advice would you give to educators and parents about fostering a love of learning in a world that is constantly changing and where everybody seems to be constantly turned on? But are they turned on to the degree we were turned on in the past? There are so many distractions. And do you agree that standards in education are not what they used to be and that there is a general dumbing down happening?
There is, and we've changed the purpose. I'm going to put it that way. Our solution is we call them the global competencies.
Sure.
So it's character, compassion, citizenship,
Mhm.
critical thinking, creativity, uh, uh, and 6 C's anyways. And those 6 C's then are mobilized through pedagogy that's co-developed by the principal, teacher, and students around guidelines that we have. And it shows the re-involvement of teachers and students. The evidence is very clear. I've traced it in a lot of different places. There's about 20% of students now, by the time they reach year 10 or 11,
Sure.
that are interested in schooling, really intrinsically interested.
Wow.
That's a huge loss.
So
It
it's
used
like
to
the
be 65%, now it's 20. So our solution of the 6 C's and the new pedagogy, which is the partnership, it reverses that trend. Students get more and more interested. They want to stay, they want to develop, and they have a bigger sense of purpose. We'll
That
see.
that resonates with the wording that the change in the new iteration of the looking at our schools document, the layouts document 2022 to 26. And we used to talk in terms of collaboration, but
Yeah.
now you're talking and student voice. Now they're talking about parent and student participation. So yeah, we're on the one wavelength in that.
Yeah, it could be that participation could end up being superficial. So we have to be careful of what the substance is.
Right. Right. So it has to be directed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how can educators balance the teaching of foundational knowledge with the need to foster creativity and adaptability in students?
The best form of knowledge is through creativity.
Right.
Ken Robinson said that for 40 years. And so our 6 C's, the students are producing knowledge a mile a minute, but
Right.
it's through the pedagogies of the 6 C's. It's not through the memory work or things that used to be considered content knowledge. So you have to get at the basics indirectly through the sense of purpose that I've described with the 6 C's, and they produce a lot more painlessly the content of standards that we tried to get the wrong way by forcing it. And now we're getting it indirectly through the action of what people do to improve their situation.
Where does technology lie? Is there a strategic use of technology in the development of the 6 C's?
Yes, there is. I mentioned proximity with practice.
Sure.
So that the in all the systems that we work with, AI is one of the 8 factors. We say the approach is to AI. AI will be there inevitably. So you might as well move towards the danger and deal with it on your terms. You exploit AI before it exploits you.
So there's a real space there for education of parents and teachers in how to nudge that along, isn't there?
Well, yeah, that I call it the jazz ensemble. You could call it a quartet, but it's the student, the teacher, the principal, the parent/community. That's the ensemble. Those 4 interacting, building trust with each other, producing creativity. That's the answer. It's not the policy that's coming around the corner.
So there's a real need for the education of the parent and for the shaking hands between the community, the local community, the parent body, and the school, and led by the school principal.
Yeah, when I said the principal has to be the build the local
the
system, it means that they're teaching that ensemble of 4 people the handshake solution. That's basically what it means.
Excellent. And what do you think now in terms of empathy and emotional intelligence, and what role will they play in the education of future generations? You know, we're talking about AI, and we will use it, and we use the technology as the tool. But the delineating factor at the minute is the human's ability to empathize and the elements of Goleman's emotional intelligence. Will there be a brave move made with AI to actually mimic that also?
I don't know whether mimic is, but it includes it. So if you think of our model is pretty simple, but there's the purpose part, which is developing to be good in society and good for society. There are our 6 C's. So we talked about those. The part you've just raised is our third part, which is the learning design. And the learning design is building relationships and building pedagogy.
Right.
Yeah, they all those, and then we're now measuring the outcomes with the 6 C's and other different ways of measuring the outcomes. So there's only 5 things: purpose plus the other 4 I just mentioned. You put them all together, you've got a system solution.
And that solution is universal. It can be used right across.
Yes, absolutely.
Excellent. And what innovative approaches or practices have you seen or used that are making a difference in preparing students for the future? Just what you've described, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, we can just look. We co-developed with Anaheim. Anaheim has 20 schools and 26,000 students, and all kinds of diversity and poverty and all that. We've co-designed. They did their part. We did our part, and they are around now, just going even further in this new stage we're at, trying to influence state policy, California state policy.
Sure. Do you think AI can ever replicate the handshake, not just as the physical gesture, but as a symbol of trust and mutual understanding?
I don't know. I think AI is here to stay. So we just need to realize we're going to be different humans from here on in. How do you, as I said, move towards the danger and get the values you're talking about as part and parcel of it? And I do think now that we are developing our technology person, his name is Max. We are developing bots and apps that put the control in the hands of the teachers and students together as they develop the 6 Cs. So it's really tying in technology and saying it's going to be there. Let's get it before it gets us.
And the pace of its development, do you think that it can develop to such an extent that it will surpass what you're trying to put in place right now? That it can undo or render benign what you're trying to do?
No, I think the opposite. I think it can maximize what we're doing. I think it can accelerate it. The speed of change to do this is going to be greater with AI if you do it well than if you didn't have AI.
What would the loss be to the human if he or she accepted microchipping and control from another source?
I think it has to do with your values and your what is your purpose and guide in this. And this is, remember, we are talking about increasing trust in society. This is humans we're talking about around this development of more things. I do think there's much more exposure to each other than ever before in our history. More diversity, more worldwide exposure. A lot of that is negative, but it could evolve to being positive. And I think that's the evolutionary prediction. It will end up being positive because we will have not only the human element, but the social human element, because social interaction is the key to sorting out what works and what doesn't work.
I suppose I put it in another way. Has there been a loss to the sanctity of the human in terms of versus alongside the pace of the development of AI and the push and shove that's happening?
Yes, there has been a loss, but AI hasn't been in the control of the educators until there's proximity now that I'm talking about. So
Sure.
yeah, I think of it this way. Here's AI coming more. The loss in humanity goes this way, and then if we figure it out, it's going to accelerate faster than it lost. So that's worth debating. So I don't think it's a fait accompli. It's part of the agenda to debate.
Sure. We're sort of bordering on the whole notion of transhumanism, etc., and some of the questions I'm asking, but it's an area that interests me, and I'd love to go on and do other studies on the impact of technology and dependence on AI and screens, etc., on the development of the human brain.
Yeah. Well, part of my chief neuroscientist is a woman named Jean Clinton.
Yes.
She's a neuroscientist and early learning, but also youth. So we're working on this together. So these cognitive scientists and neuroscientists with human values and social interaction. She wrote a book on trust. Actually, is the name of the book. Just last year it came out. So we have the right minds, I think, and the right agenda, worrying about these things and integrating where we can.
Sure. So finally,
yes,
if AI could give you a piece of career advice based on your experience, what do you think it would say?
I think it's getting into some actual action where you are co-developing the solution as you work with this, and you can gravitate more. It has to be not just individual or a small group, but sizable, bigger than a school. So 10 schools or whatever the bigger of school is. We have 20 schools in Anaheim. We have 87 schools in Ottawa. So the unit here is that local combination, and they are not isolated because our mandate for them is exploit upward, exploit the middle, exploit the top, be your own person, be transparent, and just
And have trust and preserve that trust.
yeah, have trust and make trust,
Sure.
develop trust. Yeah.
Develop trust. Yeah, that's what I should really have said. Develop trust.
Yeah.
Michael, it has been such a pleasure to speak with you, and let this be the first of many conversations on the handshake. And I am so delighted to meet with you again. I talked with you about 2 years ago on asking the hard questions, and I've just come around to the handshake now. So let it be something that we work on together.
Okay, and I'll send you some things. I look forward to hearing from you some more. Back and forth.
Lovely, lovely. I will share our system with you, and we will see where the synergies can occur.
Okay, it's a deal.
Hey, thank you
I won't
so
say
much.
that shape on it, but you know what I mean.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
Thanks very
Take
much.
care. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.